Nearly 20 years ago now, James Cameron was interviewed on this unmade movie and talked about Ridley Scott's involvement and what the film could have been like. Again, quoting the director, "Yeah, Ridley and I talked about doing another Alien film, and I said to 20th Century Fox that I would develop a fifth Alien film. I started working on a story, I was working with another writer, and Fox came back to me and said, 'We've got this really good script for Alien versus Predator,' and I got pretty upset. Cameron said, 'You do that, you're going to kill the validity of the franchise in my mind,' because to me, that was Frankenstein meets werewolf. It was Universal just taking their assets and starting to play them off against each other, milking it. So I stopped work. Then I saw Alien vs. Predator, and it was actually pretty good. I think of the 5 Alien films, I'd rate it third."
So has anyone ever noticed that when the Predator's wrist explosion blows up in the flashback, it totally wipes out the aliens and buries the Temple City? But when another one blows up later on, it completely destroys it for some reason? Anyways. Alien vs. Predator is a 2004 film that combined both creatures from their respective franchises into one giant battle-oriented story that resulted in some pretty unremarkable results. Many fans of both the Alien and Predator series have gone on record to say that they dislike the film, and there was always a dissatisfaction over the fact that the movie was made PG-13 instead of R. You'd think that after combining two of the most violent and vulgar language-filled monster franchises ever, that you'd get something that would undoubtedly get that rating, but that's not exactly what happened. Now, this movie is around 18 years old, and when it comes to film criticism and critiques made against the movie, it's been pretty well documented and assessed that the overall treatment of the film's characters and logic are all underwhelming, to say the least. This is something that's been repeated and analyzed endlessly for nearly 2 decades now, so I don't really want to add anything else to that whole conversation because, well, I don't really think there's much else that needs to be said, and also because I just view it as being kind of low-hanging fruit. But when it comes to the actual canon and lore that Alien vs. Predator uses to tell its story, well, that's where I really want to start a discussion. Because you see, on paper, when it came to how the filmmakers went about designing and actually building the world for this movie, I actually think Alien vs. Predator is a pretty high concept idea. The visual iconography of a pyramid trapped in the Arctic is remarkably different to what the audience would have seen before in the series, and the idea of a rite of passage sort of ritual for the predators to go through in order to become real hunters was a good way to incorporate the aliens into the story while still keeping their menace. Generally speaking, I actually really think the setup and design of a lot of the first Alien vs. Predator is really done quite well. In fact, there's lots of scenes in this movie that I can look at, especially when it's just the two creatures fighting each other. I can just look at and go, wow, that's cool. I'm very happy they filmed all that. However, with all of this setup comes a lot of really noticeable problems in the lore and its relation to the previous films in both the Alien and Predator series, with one scene in particular being the most frustrating for me. We're basically talking about continuity between Alien and Predator movies here, so buckle up. For starters, the Predators in this movie are supposed to go out of their way to actually track down their weapons and engage with the aliens in the pyramid. However, before doing any of that, they run into some humans on the surface. This little battle with the Predators and people gets a little ridiculous towards the end when you realize that none of the Predators wound up skinning anyone after they made their kills. Now sure, you can say that they don't really have the time to do something like that, and that it's not that important to the overall story, and I think that's a good counter argument, and I've already said some nice things about this movie, but one of the things that Predators are kind of well known for is skinning their prey after fighting them. The original Predator made a very big deal of this when Arnold's team found out that General Hopper's chopper, that rhymed, had all those people skinned. Otherwise, why even hang these people up after you kill them in this movie? Now I'm going to assume that the reason they did this was due to the fact that the studio wanted a PG-13 rating, so you can't have skinned dead bodies hanging up, but I don't want to overanalyze it because there's way more important stuff I want to get to, particularly in regard to the aliens in this movie. Now, the film establishes that the pyramid reconfigures itself every 10 minutes or so, and we see this happen several times in the film. That makes for a pretty cool idea that keeps people on their toes, but it kind of shoots the alien canon in the head when it comes to how long it takes these things to gestate in people's bodies and grow into full adults. Now, I'm no expert here, but I know that in previous movies, it definitely took longer than the span of about 10 minutes for aliens to actually grow full size with the amount of skin shedding and hiding that would have to go along with it. And of course, we shouldn't forget that when it came to this movie, the aliens kind of popped out of the people extremely quickly, whereas in the original Alien, it took Kane a really long while before he got chest bursted. That dude was out cold for an entire medical examination to take place, and in AVP, they just kind of pop out of people and start growing at maybe 20 or 30 minutes max.
Personally, I disagree with James Cameron there. I don't quite think it's anywhere near the top 3 for Alien movies. And the guy that was interviewing him actually has a conversation to talk about this and kind of back up my point, where he says he hated it because it basically destroyed the continuity of the series. And James Cameron actually had some responses to that, which I thought was interesting. He says he liked the movie a lot, and he did understand that Alien vs. Predator made up its own rules, specifically with the incubation time of the aliens inside the people, where you go from egg to chest burster. That's like 10 minutes in time in the scope of the plot of Alien vs. Predator, because the pyramid changes every 10 minutes, and not only do they pop out in 10 minutes, but they grow to full size. There's other stuff like the queen alien attacking the predator, even though the predator has an alien queen embryo inside of it, completely abandoning like a lot of the lore that we've seen from Alien 3. He liked the movie a lot and did acknowledge that it did break a lot of the rules. To quote him, well, it starts to become a video game. It's like, okay, that can be in him and that can show up over here. It becomes more metaphorical or more comic book. I don't mean comic book in a negative way. I just mean that it's working at a kind of mythic, metaphoric level as opposed to really trying to immerse you in reality.
But no, Alien vs. Predator didn't really adhere to any of that, and in the end, while I will admit that I really like this imagery and the fight in general, the whole idea of breaking these film series' respective continuities in order to tell this story, it just doesn't really sit right with me. And it's one of the reasons that I actually think if Alien vs. Predator were allowed to have one solid rewrite, just one person to overlook the little details like this before shooting the movie, as well as making the character arcs and story progressions more engaging and meaningful as well, of course, this could have been an exceptionally better product, and one that I think Alien and Predator fans wouldn't have to complain about in the years that would eventually follow. I know it's based on a comic book, and it's a pretty cool story there. They changed some stuff, and I think the stuff they changed actually is visually striking and memorable, but the story and logic, oh man, they just threw that stuff out the window when it came to the characters and this film's lore and its relation to like Alien, Aliens, Predator, Predator 2, all that stuff. Anyways, guys, these are all just my own thoughts on the subject matter. Not much of a review, but just kind of my thoughts on what happened to some of the logic that played out in this movie. Like I said before, I don't necessarily hate the first Alien vs. Predator film because I respect a lot of the talent that went behind designing a lot of these ideas and monster lore that it was displaying for its story. In fact, I think the actual story of the film, minus the human stuff, is pretty interesting. But the logistics of this showdown in respect to the earlier movies just never makes clear sense to me when I'm watching it. It's always kind of hard to take it seriously when you put that stuff into consideration. But hey, maybe Alien vs. Predator it has no continuity with the Alien movies. If you just drop that and say that, hey, you know, these aliens grow in like 10 minutes and they gestate in 5, and you don't need to worry about any of that because they don't care about the continuing of their species, so they'll just, I don't know. I just find that hard to really accept. Overall, I think the first AVP is better than something like Alien Resurrection and The Predator from 2018, but it doesn't hold a candle to the originals, which are favorites of mine, by the way. But hey, whatever your own thoughts happen to be, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below.